Nobody noticed the first black SUV.
She looks absolutely
At Damien
stunning.
Bellows' wedding,
I can't believe
expensive
it.
cars had been gliding through the Lecky gates all evening, each one carrying another important name, another jeweled smile, another witness to his victory. But when the second matching SUV rolled in behind it, then the third, the music faltered, conversations thinned, and a strange silence moved through the estate like a warning. Someone important had arrived. The only question was why Damien suddenly looked like a man who had just remembered a ghost. The lagoon beyond the estate glittered under rows of hanging crystal lights. White orchids curved around the entrance like a corridor built for royalty. Waiters in ivory jackets floated between guests with trays of champagne. A string quartet played under a transparent canopy. Everything about the night announced money, taste, status. Everything about Damien's expression announced fear. Beside him, Celeste Afolayan followed his gaze toward the gates and lowered her voice. "Who is that?" Damien did not answer. The center SUV stopped. Two security men stepped out first, dark suits, coiled earpieces, calm eyes that did not scan like bodyguards hired for show. They scanned like men trained to expect danger before it introduced itself. One of Damien's groomsmen gave a nervous laugh. "Governor's wife," he guessed. No one laughed with him. Then the rear door opened. A heel touched the pavement. Bronze silk caught the light. And when Amara Okonkwo rose from the back seat, the entire entrance changed. They did not step out like a woman returning to make a scene. She stepped out like a woman arriving late to a future she no longer had to explain. The first whisper came from somewhere near the champagne tower. "That's her." The second came sharper. "That's Amara." Then the murmurs spread like fire catching dry cloth. Damien's ex-wife? No, that can't be her. Why is she here with security? Wait, look at her. Damien felt the ground shift beneath a night he had spent months designing. Because the woman walking through his gates was not the woman he had divorced. The woman he divorced had left his office in the rain with 2 suitcases. No fight, no begging, no public breakdown. He had told himself that kind of silence meant weakness. That kind of composure meant defeat. That kind of woman always broke later, in private, where it no longer inconvenienced powerful men. But this woman moved as if silence had taught her how to carry thunder. And the worst part, the part Damien felt in his throat before he could name it, was that she had not looked at him yet. 3 years earlier, on a storm-heavy afternoon in Victoria Island, Damien had pushed a folder across a polished table and smiled the way cruel men smile when they want their cruelty mistaken for confidence. "Sign it, Amara," he said, swirling amber whiskey in a crystal glass. "And at least try to look grateful when you do." The divorce papers lay open between them, their edges perfectly aligned, their intent perfectly ugly. Rain dragged silver lines down the glass walls of his top-floor office. Lagos pulsed far below, horns, traffic, restless ambition. But up there, the city looked distant and obedient, the way powerful men like it. The room smelled faintly of leather, whiskey, and new money. Damien leaned back in his chair, as if even the weather answered to him. Across from him sat the woman who had spent 11 years loving him. 11 years of believing him when nobody else did. Years of standing beside him when investors laughed. Years of hearing his potential before the world called it genius. years of shrinking herself inch by inch so his rise could feel effortless. And now, he looked at her the way men look at old furniture they have already decided to replace. His lawyer adjusted a cufflink and pretended to study the papers. He had likely seen betrayal before, but even he seemed uncomfortable with the performance Damien was enjoying. "No tears?" Damien asked, when Amara said nothing. "No speech about sacrifice? I thought you'd at least want the dignity of a dramatic exit." Amara lowered her eyes to the papers. Apartment rights, vehicle transfers, investment releases. Enough money to make him appear generous, not enough to let her forget whose terms she was leaving on. When she still didn't respond, he smiled wider. "There she is," he murmured. "That quiet superiority. You always did think you were deeper than everybody else." Amara finally looked up. "You practiced that line before I came in," she said. His lawyer looked down quickly. Damien laughed. "You see? This is what I lived with. Every conversation had to become philosophy. Every disagreement had to become moral theater." Amara folded her hands in her lap, steady. "What you lived with," she said softly, "was a woman who believed in you before anybody else had the courage to." His jaw flexed. "I stayed when your first deals collapsed. I stayed when you borrowed status because you couldn't yet afford your own. I stayed when success started changing your voice. I stayed when applause became more important to you than honesty." Silence fell. Even the rain seemed to pause and listen. Damien leaned forward slowly, his eyes brightening with the kind of meanness that prefers witnesses. "And yet," he said, "here you are, still being left." There it was. Not the divorce, not even the betrayal. The humiliation. He wanted her wounded, smaller, ashamed. He wanted her to carry the ending like proof that he had always been the prize. Amara's gaze drifted to the second name buried in the paperwork. Celeste Afolayan, 27. Fashion influencer, society darling. The woman Damien had been seeing long before he found the courage to call it honesty. He followed her gaze and smirked. "You found out before I told you, didn't you?" Amara said nothing. "She understands my world better than you ever did." A breath escaped Amara's lips. Not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief. "You mean she performs it better?" Damien tilted his head. "You know your problem? You confuse being dignified with being cold. Men don't want to come home to a lecture, Amara. They want admiration, ease, lightness." "And women?" she asked. "What do they deserve?" He shrugged. "That depends on what they bring to the table." The lawyer shifted. Something about that answer made even the office feel ashamed of him. Damien slid a pen toward her. "Let's not drag this out. I'm being generous." Amara glanced over the settlement again. Then quietly she said, "You can keep it." His face changed. "What?" "The apartment, the cars, all of it." He stared at her, then laughed. "That's pride talking." "No," she said. "That's freedom." For the first time that afternoon, something uncertain moved behind his eyes. He covered it quickly with contempt. "You always did know how to make bad decisions sound noble." Amara picked up the pen. He watched her fingers, waiting for them to tremble. They didn't. She signed the first page.
then the next, then the last. Slowly, cleanly, with no spectacle to feed on. When she set the pen down, Damien frowned as if she had cheated him out of the scene he had prepared for. "That's it?" he asked. "No begging? No asking me to reconsider? No speech about what we were?" Amara stood. The chair slid back with a soft scrape across the floor. Then she removed her wedding ring and placed it gently on top of the papers. Only then did Damien stop looking entertained. Only then did he look uncertain. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. "You'll regret walking away from this life," he called after her. She paused, one hand on the handle. For a second, she said nothing. Then she turned her head just enough for him to hear her. "You keep saying 'this life,'" Amara said, "like you built the whole sky." He swallowed. A beat passed. Then she gave him the line he would remember years later, when memory finally stopped protecting his ego.
"No, Damien. I'm not walking away from my life. I'm walking away from the version of it where you got to define my size." And then she left. The door clicked shut. Damien stared at it longer than he meant to. He told himself it was irritation, not discomfort, definitely not fear. He would spend the next 3 years discovering how wrong a man can be when he mistakes silence for surrender. 3 years later, Amara stood barefoot in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking Nairobi, reading a contract summary on her tablet while dawn spilled gold across the skyline. Traffic moved below like veins of light. Inside, everything was quiet. Not lonely quiet, earned quiet. The kind built by sleepless effort, healed wounds, discipline, and the breathtaking relief of no longer begging anyone to stay. Her assistant, Zuri, entered with a leather folder, 2 phones, and the expression of someone trying not to ruin a perfect morning. "You have Kigali at 10, Johannesburg at noon, and Dakar moved the board review to 4. Amara nodded, eyes still on the screen. "The Ethiopian partners?" "Confirmed." "Good." Zuri hesitated. That alone made Amara look up. "What is it?" Zuri lifted a cream-colored envelope with gold edges. "Courier brought this. No return address." Something in the handwriting made Amara's hand go still before she even touched it. Some names remain recognizable long after the heart stops answering to them. She opened it. Inside was a wedding invitation. "Mr. Damien Bello and Miss Celeste Afolayan request the honor of your presence." The room changed temperature. Zuri studied her face, expecting anger, pain, maybe the polite stiffness people wear when the past appears uninvited. Amara turned the card over. There, in black ink, written by hand, "You should come. It's time you saw what winning looks like." Zuri inhaled sharply. "Oh, that man is sick." Amara said nothing. She kept looking at the sentence long enough for memory to try opening old doors. Then, slowly, the corner of her mouth lifted. Not a wounded smile, not an angry one, a dangerously calm one. Zuri noticed at once. "Oh no." Amara looked up. "Oh no what?" "That face. That exact face means somebody has just made a very expensive mistake." Amara set the card down and reached for her coffee. "When is it?" "Saturday. Lekki Waterfront Estate. 7 p.m. Clear my evening. Zuri blinked. You're going? 3 years earlier, Amara had left Lagos with 2 suitcases, no settlement, and a silence Damien mistook for collapse. What he did not know, what almost nobody knew, was what happened after. The first months were not cinematic. They were ugly and private, which is how real grief usually is. Some mornings she got out of bed because rent existed. Some nights she stared at ceilings and replayed entire conversations, hearing in hindsight where love had started sounding like correction. There were days she doubted herself so thoroughly she could not trust even her own memories. Had he always been that way? Had she imagined the tenderness? Had she confused being chosen with being valued? She healed without an audience. No revenge posts, no interviews, no vague captions about betrayal, no strategic tears for sympathy. Just work. And beneath the work, thinking. Amara had always thought in systems, in patterns, in connections other people dismissed because they were too busy admiring surfaces. While Damien built status, she had studied need. Freight bottlenecks, power shortages, broken storage chains, rural women holding entire local economies together without access to formal capital. Farmers losing profit because produce spoiled before it could travel. Clinics running on unreliable power. Communities functioning on improvisation because infrastructure kept arriving as a promise and leaving as a speech. What Damien once mocked as overthinking became the foundation of her future. She built IO-Nexus quietly. What started as a modest logistics and energy network connecting agricultural cooperatives to solar cold storage hubs grew into something larger, then larger again. Transport corridors, microfinance partnerships, distribution systems across Kenya, Rwanda, Ghana, Nigeria. By the time investors noticed, the company no longer needed permission to exist. She did not build it loudly. That was everyone's mistake with her. They thought silence meant absence. By the second year, ministers knew her name. By the third, banks that would once have made her wait in reception were sending cars. Panels invited her. Deals followed her. Publications profiled her. People who had once spoken over her now prefaced sentences with, "As Ms. Okonkwo has rightly said." And through all of it, she never once called Damien. Never once asked if he regretted it. Never once tried to prove he had lost something. Because rebuilding is most powerful when it is not addressed to the person who broke you. Zuri crossed her arms. That invitation isn't about closure. It's about humiliation. I know. He wants you uncomfortable. Amara turned toward the skyline again. Then he's about to be disappointed. Zuri studied her. What exactly happens when Damien sees you now? Amara's eyes stayed on the city. That, she said, is what I'm curious to find out. She picked up her phone and called Kofi Mensah. He answered on the second ring. Good morning, ma'am. Kofi had led her executive security for a year and a half. Former military, controlled, observant, not easily impressed. The kind of man who made people straighten their lies before speaking. Clear Saturday evening, Amara said. A pause. Then his voice sharpened slightly. Personal or corporate? Amara looked at the invitation. Yes. He almost laughed. Understood. I'll need 3 vehicles. Done. And discreet perimeter coverage. Done. No spectacle. With respect, ma'am, Kofi said evenly. Some people create spectacle simply by stepping out of a car. A real smile touched her face. That sounds like flattery. No, ma'am. That sounds like logistics. That same evening in Lagos, Damien sat in a private lounge with his groomsmen, one hand around a whiskey glass, the other waving through half-edited stories the way arrogant men narrate their own innocence. "She'll come," he said. One of the men laughed. "You really think your ex still cares that much?" Damien smirked. She cared too much. That was always the problem. Another asked, "So what actually happened between you two?" The version he gave them was polished and convenient. "She couldn't adapt," he said. "Once my world started expanding, she became difficult. Some women don't know how to exist when they're no longer the center." Sympathetic noises followed. None of them knew the truth. And Damien liked it that way. Celeste entered a moment later in white silk and diamonds, her smile bright enough to pass for happiness if you weren't looking closely. She kissed Damien's cheek, then glanced down at a printed guest list on the table. Her fingers stopped. "You invited Amara?" Damien leaned back. "Of course." "Why?" His smile returned, small and poisonous. "Because I want her to see what she lost." Celeste laughed automatically. Then she looked at him again. Something in the answer unsettled her. Women often recognize ego long before men realize it has started sounding like rot. On the night of the wedding, stylists adjusted the drape of a bronze gown across Amara's shoulder while she stood in silence before a wide mirror. No revenge dress. No theatrical statement. No attempt to outshine a bride. That was never the assignment. Real power does not arrive screaming. It arrives composed. Kofi stood near the doorway, scanning his phone. "Media already suspects you might attend." "Of course they do." "You can still decide not to go." Amara looked at her reflection. 3 years ago, she would have avoided the event entirely. Not because she was weak, because she was still bleeding from injuries nobody could see. But time had changed the texture of that pain. Now she was simply curious. Curious whether his voice still had weight. Curious whether the old fear would recognize her. Curious whether the life that once shrank her could stand in front of her and find nothing left to control. "Prepare the convoy," she said, and somewhere deep inside her, the last frightened version of herself began to let go. Back at the estate, whispers followed Amara as she crossed the entrance garden. Guests parted without being asked, some out of curiosity, some out of instinct. Some because presence of that kind reorganizes space. A waiter offered her champagne. "Sparkling water," she said. Even that unsettled Damien. She was not performing wounded dignity. She was not performing anything at all. She was simply there. And somehow, that was worse. Phones appeared discreetly under tables and behind clutches. Guests searched her name. One after another, expressions shifted. Amara Okonkwo. Oh my God. She founded IO Nexus, the infrastructure company. This says she just closed a renewable transport deal in Kigali. Wasn't she in Forbes Africa? She's speaking at the Pan-African Development Summit next month. The attention moved through the crowd, fast and hot. People who had ignored her at first now wanted introductions. Investors smiled too eagerly. A retired minister asked if she had time next week. A banker from Accra complimented her logistics model as if he had always believed in it. Across the lawn, Damien heard fragments of her new life, the way guilty men hear a verdict being read. Because for 3 years, he had been telling a story in which she faded. And now, at his own wedding, his guests were discovering that while he had been curating spectacle, Amara had been building consequence. Then his mother saw her. Mrs. Adesua Bello moved through the crowd with the careful dignity of a woman who had learned too late which silences become regrets. She stopped in front of Amara and for a moment simply looked at her. "Amara," she said softly. "Good evening, Ma." The older woman studied her face, the security detail, the calm. "You look..." She stopped. What she wanted to say was formidable. What she said was, "Well?" Amara smiled. "I am." Mrs. Bello lowered her voice. "Damien told people the divorce broke you." Amara lifted her glass slightly. People often believe the version of events that protects someone else's ego. The older woman glanced toward her son. "He underestimated you." Amara's expression did not harden. "No," she said gently. "He just never took the time to see me outside the role he preferred." That sentence followed Mrs. Bello long after Amara moved away. Near the fountain, Celeste's composure had begun to crack in ways only another woman would notice. Every few minutes, someone mentioned Amara. "She's stunning in person. She's quieter than I expected. That kind of security isn't decorative. I heard European funds are trying to partner with her." Celeste turned to Damien, smile brittle. "You told me she was struggling." He kept his eyes on Amara. She was. Celeste looked at the security detail again. "Women who are struggling do not arrive like presidents." One of Damien's friends leaned close and muttered, "Brother, this is not the story you told us." Damien said nothing. Because across the lawn by the water, Amara stood speaking to an older businessman and a Rwandan investor with the kind of ease money cannot buy and heartbreak cannot fake. She was not dazzling them, not flirting, not trying. She was simply at home in her own mind. Then she felt it, the stare. She turned. Across the estate, her eyes met Damien's for the first time that night. He expected something. Resentment, bitterness, a crack beneath the polish. Anything. Instead, she looked at him the way people look at buildings they once lived in, but no longer miss. Then she gave him a small, perfectly civil smile, and looked away first. That was when irritation became panic, because hatred would have meant there was still a wire between them. Hatred still confesses importance. Indifference is colder. Indifference means your throne existed only in your own imagination. The wedding had not even started, and already Damien no longer felt like the center of his own evening. "Go speak to her," Celeste said through clenched teeth. He turned. "What?" "Go remind people she's your ex-wife, not some head of state." "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Her voice sharpened. "Because half these people are whispering about her instead of looking at us." He glanced back toward the fountain. Amara was listening to someone with a thoughtful smile, one hand resting lightly around her glass. Completely at ease. Completely unthreatened. And suddenly, he needed to know why. So pride did what pride always does when it begins losing control. It walked toward the one person who could expose it. Conversations softened as Damien approached. Even Kofi adjusted his stance, though only slightly. Amara looked up. Her expression did not change. Damien. His name sounded clean in her mouth, filed away, no longer sacred. Amara. He sat across from her before noticing she had not invited him to. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was not fiery. It was uneven, because she was steady, and he wasn't. "You look different," he said at last. Amara tilted her head. "That usually happens after 3 years. That's not what I meant." "I know." A waiter passed with a tray. "Champagne, sir." Damien nodded automatically. Before the waiter could move on, Amara said, "Make it whiskey. He prefers confidence in liquid form." The waiter nearly smiled. Damien stared at her. That had almost sounded like humor. "You never used to joke like that." "I used to spend too much energy surviving your moods." The line landed harder than he expected. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because calm truth is more humiliating than anger. He leaned back. "So you hate me now?" Amara looked genuinely puzzled. "Hate you?" She repeated the word as if testing whether it still belonged in her vocabulary. "No, Damien." "Then what is this?" She gestured lightly around them. The flowers, the orchestra, the polished spectacle of his chosen life. "This," she said, "this is what happens when consequences dress well." For the first time that night, he had no answer. He took the whiskey when it arrived and drank too quickly. Amara watched his hand around the glass. "You're nervous." "I'm not nervous." "You're holding that glass like it offended you." He loosened his grip instantly. She noticed, of course. She always had. That used to be one of the things he loved about her. Being understood without explanation. Until being seen stopped flattering him and started threatening him. "I honestly didn't think you'd come," he admitted. "I know." "Then why did you?" Her eyes drifted briefly toward the lagoon, the white roses, the aisle, the bride laughing too brightly with guests she was no longer focused on. Then she looked back at him. "I wanted to find out whether the old pain was still alive." His chest tightened, and he asked, "It isn't." The words dropped cleanly between them. He hid his reaction behind another swallow of whiskey. "You make that sound easy." "It wasn't." That answer caught him off guard. She crossed one leg elegantly over the other and spoke without performance. "There were months after the divorce when I barely recognized myself. I questioned everything, my instincts, my worth, the years I gave you, the parts of me I abandoned just to keep peace in rooms where peace was never really offered." He said nothing. Because for the first time all evening, he was hearing not the edited version of their marriage he fed other people, but the one that had actually happened. Then she said, "I learned something important." He waited. "You did not break me all at once." His jaw tightened. "That's dramatic." She gave a faint smile. "No, dramatic would have been me screaming. This is accuracy." He looked away. "You made me smaller in portions," she continued. "In jokes, in interruptions, in corrections disguised as concern, in the way you introduced me, as if I existed beside your success instead of helping carry it. That's not fair." A sad little laugh escaped her. "Damien, I was given permission to orbit your life. That is not the same thing as being allowed to have one." He felt something uncomfortable moving through old memories. Dinners where he cut her off. Meetings where he smiled and said, "Amara is brilliant with people, but let me handle the serious numbers." Moments he had called teasing, because admitting cruelty would have required self-awareness. At the time, it had all felt normal. Now, under wedding lights and in front of the only person who had ever truly known him, it sounded ugly. She saw realization reach him and said quietly, "You invited me here to hurt me." He opened his mouth. You wrote it on the card." His eyes shifted. She repeated the line from memory, word for word. "It's time you saw what winning looks like." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "Maybe I wanted you to compare," he said. "And now?" That question was dangerous because he no longer knew which of them looked victorious. He studied her. Not the gown, not the jewelry, not the security, but her. The calmness, the ease, the unnerving absence of hunger. And suddenly he remembered the woman she had once been, before marriage wore her down. Brilliant, restless, full of ideas he had never valued because they did not center him. "You changed," he said quietly. For the first time that night, something softened in her face. "No, Damien. I returned to myself after leaving the place where I had to ask permission to expand." The sentence struck him with the quiet violence of irreversible truth. Because he understood then, too late, too clearly, that she had not come for revenge. Revenge still needs attachment. This was closure. And closure is colder. Across the garden, Celeste watched them with growing alarm. "They've been talking too long," she snapped to her maid of honor. Because from a distance, Damien no longer looked like a groom. He looked like a man standing too close to the evidence of his own mistake. Back at the table, he asked the question before pride could stop him. "Are you happy?" Amara looked at him. Then she smiled. Not politely, not strategically, genuinely. "Yes." That one word injured him more than any insult she could have chosen. Because for 3 years, he had believed some important part of her life had ended when their marriage did. And yet, the woman before him looked more alive than she ever had, sitting at his table, wearing his ring. Amara stood. Kofi moved a fraction closer without being called. Damien noticed. That kind of loyalty does not come cheap. It comes earned. "You're leaving?" he asked. "I have an early meeting in Addis tomorrow." The answer was so casual it almost embarrassed him. Different countries, different altitude, different world. She picked up her clutch and paused. "For years," she said softly, "I thought losing you would be the worst thing that ever happened to me." A small silence passed between them. "Then I learned something better can begin the moment you stop mistaking survival for love." She turned. He heard himself say, "Amara." She stopped, but did not face him yet. "When did you stop loving me?" The question came from a place he had not intended to expose. At last, she turned back. And for the first time all evening, her face held something like sadness. Not for herself, for him. "It didn't happen in one day," she said. "It happened in small disappointments." He swallowed. "Every time I brought you an idea and you mocked it before understanding it. Every time I needed tenderness and got correction instead. Every time you embarrassed me in public and called it teasing. Every time you enjoyed my dependence more than my presence." His throat tightened. She stepped slightly closer. "Love rarely dies in one explosion, Damien. Most times, it dies from neglect so consistent it starts to feel like climate." The orchestra swelled somewhere near the aisle. The planner was searching for the groom. Guests were taking their seats. But for one suspended moment, none of it mattered. Amara held his gaze. I hope you become a kinder husband than you were." Then she walked away, and Damien remained there, surrounded by orchids, music, and the expensive wreckage of his own assumptions. The wedding happened, technically. The vows were said, the cameras flashed, champagne flowed. Guests posted perfect angles and called it beautiful, because beauty is easier to photograph than truth. But something had gone wrong in a place no lighting could repair. Damien stood at the altar beside Celeste and repeated promises with his mouth, while his mind remained near the fountain, hearing Amara say with no bitterness at all that his importance in her life had expired. From the audience, Mrs. Bello watched her son carefully. A mother recognizes absence, and Damien was absent. Not physically, spiritually. As if some part of him had remained seated across from his former wife, finally hearing what he had spent years interrupting. During the reception, he smiled when spoken to, laughed when required, thanked guests for attending. But every compliment sounded thin. Every toast felt borrowed. Every song felt too loud. Celeste noticed. Of course she did. Women always notice the shadows men think their suits can hide. When they finally got a moment alone between photographs and speeches, she turned to him sharply. "Tell me the truth." He looked exhausted already. "About what?" "About her." He said nothing. That silence was its own confession. Celeste's expression changed. "You're not upset she came?" He rubbed his forehead. "Don't do this tonight." "No." Her voice dropped. "You're upset because she didn't come broken." He stared at her. She laughed once, bitterly. "That's what this is, isn't it? You thought she would walk in here wounded so you could feel chosen." "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. Because how do you explain a truth you are only just discovering? How do you admit that you loved being needed more than you loved being known? That you confused dependence with devotion? That the woman you dismissed now made your triumph feel borrowed? Celeste stepped back slowly. "Oh my God." He frowned. "What?" "You didn't expect her to become more after you." Her voice turned quiet. "You expected her to disappear." That was the moment Celeste truly saw the man she had married. Not the charming public version, not the successful version. The smaller, hungrier version underneath. The one that needed women diminished to feel large. Later, after the last dance and the final staged smile, after the musicians packed up and the photographers left with their memory cards full of polished lies, Damien found himself alone near the water with a half-empty glass in his hand. The lagoon reflected the lights in broken lines of gold. Behind him, the reception still glowed. Ahead of him, the night stretched black and honest. His best man, Femi, approached quietly. "You good?" Damien gave the automatic answer. "Fine." Femi looked toward the drive where the convoy had once stood. "No, you're not." This time, Damien didn't argue. After a while, Femi said what nobody else had dared. "You told all of us she never recovered." Damien stared at the water. "She didn't, at first. But she did." "Yes." Femi hesitated. "Can I tell you something you won't like?" Damien almost smiled. "When has that ever stopped you?" Femi exhaled. "I think you liked being admired by her more than you ever actually understood her." The words landed cleanly because they were already true. Damien did not defend himself. Memory was rearranging itself too quickly now. All the times Amara had spoken about infrastructure, markets, women-led cooperatives, long-term strategy, and he had dismissed it as idealism because it came from her. All the times she had seen further than he did, and he had laughed it off because acknowledging her vision would have required him to stand beside it, not above it. He had not lost a small woman who later became powerful. He had lost a powerful woman he only knew how to love when she appeared small. That realization stripped something from him. Not wealth, not status. Certainty. Across the city, in her hotel suite, Amara stood barefoot by a window again, her bronze gown replaced by a silk robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. Below her, Lagos breathed in neon and distance. On the table behind her lay tomorrow's itinerary, unopened emails, and a glass of water. Kofi stood near the doorway after completing one final perimeter check. "Was it worth going?" he asked. For a while, she didn't answer. Then, softly, "Yes." "The closure?" A faint smile touched her mouth. "No." He waited. She looked out over the city. "He wanted me to witness his version of victory," she said. "But I didn't go there for closure from him." Kofi said nothing. Some silences feel like shelter. Amara lifted the glass, watching lights tremble below. "I needed to meet the old fear one last time," she said, "and see whether it still recognized me." "And?" She smiled at the window's reflection. "It didn't." When Kofi left, she remained there alone, thinking not about Damien, not really, but about the woman who once walked out of a high-rise office in the rain with no applause, no plan clear enough to comfort her, and no idea how extraordinary her life would become. That woman had not known she was standing at the edge of expansion. She had only known she could no longer survive inside reduction. Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes the first miracle is simply refusing to stay where your spirit keeps getting trained to apologize for its own size. Her phone buzzed with the morning agenda. Addis at 9. Accra by Thursday. Kigali next week. A scholarship launch in Enugu after that. A life. Full. Demanding. Earned. Elsewhere in Lagos, Damien sat alone in a suite designed for luxury, surrounded by flowers already beginning to wilt at the edges. Celeste had gone to another room. His jacket lay over a chair. The wedding was over. The applause was over. The perfect night he had built so carefully had handed him everything he thought he wanted. And still, the silence inside him felt louder than celebration, because for the first time in his life, he understood something success could not negotiate away. Money can rent spectacle. Charm can gather a crowd. Power can even rewrite the story for a while. But none of it can save a man from the moment the woman he underestimated returns. Not to destroy him, not to beg, not even to forgive, but to prove, simply by existing, that his absence was never the end of her story. And the cruelest thing Amara ever did was not revenge. It was healing so completely that she no longer needed him to witness it. The next morning, Lagos woke up talking. About the wedding, about the bride, about the flowers, about the photos. But underneath all that, in quieter conversations and lower voices, people kept returning to the same image. 3 black SUVs, a still woman in bronze silk, a groom who suddenly looked unsure, and a truth no amount of decoration could hide. The most dangerous thing a woman can do after being underestimated is not destroy the man who doubted her. It has become impossible to reduce again.